Hey everybody, Keep7 here, back with another Magic the Gathering Arena video, and today we were doing another card discussion, and today we were talking about Lightning Bolt. And we're not really going to be talking about whether the card is good or whether the card is bad or anything like that. Anybody who's new to the game, this card, spoiler alert, this card is very good. Anybody who is in the know about this card, who has played with this card, who knows this card, really what we're going to be talking about today is whether or not this card belongs in Standard. Whether it is balanced power level wise, does Standard need it, etc., etc. So first let's talk about the card. So Lightning Bolt is a 1 red mana instant. Lightning Bolt deals 3 damage to target creature or player. So, anybody familiar with Shock, it's Shock +1. You players out there who haven't heard of this card, it's the same thing as Shock, but +1 damage. Although it is target creature or player, so Planeswalkers, I don't think Planeswalkers existed when this card was printed. This is a very, very old card. So there's that. And again, the question, so the card is good. This card wins a game if your opponent is at 3 life. And if you're playing the kind of deck that this belongs in, which is a red aggro deck of some sort, whether it be burn, whether it be just, creature aggro, cheap creature aggro, something like that. If you're playing a deck like that, this can win you a game by getting your opponent to 3 life, and you can cast this at any time. It's an instant speed interaction, so your control opponent taps out trying to prevent you from attacking with creatures next turn or something like that, or they wipe the board. You at instant speed can cast this and win the game if they're at 3 life. It becomes obviously infinitely better when they're at lower life. Casting this early is even not that bad, because it's 3 damage, which can add up. Shock, it's the same thing with Shock. These kinds of spells are, early game. If you're casting this and attacking face, it's not that great, but, you see it in things like Gruul Aggro right now in Standard. With people, on turn 2, if people have open mana, they're casting their Bonecrusher Giant and attacking your face because, the real objective of that Gruul Aggro deck is just make sure you're dealing damage every single turn. And casting a Bonecrusher Giant when you have open mana is sometimes just a way to do that. If they don't, usually if those Gruul Aggro players don't have a creature to remove, they're attacking your face with it because they're just trying to get damage done to your face and get you to 0 as quickly as possible. And this is just a really efficient card for doing that. This will help, a lot in that regard. So it's a very good card, is what I'm trying to kind of boil all this down to. It's a very good card. I don't need to prove that. Everybody who's seen this card and plays with it knows it. For those of you who are new to it, it is a very good card. We don't need to really talk about that, but does Standard need this card is really what this video is about. I'm going to answer the question of whether or not this belongs in Standard with a question, and the question is why not? Standard is kind of flooded right now with cheap and efficient removal. We have, so let's, I guess just go by color. So in blue we have like Essence Scatter and Negate, which I guess you can count as like the best removal you can have in blue. And then and we have things like Drown in the Lock, right? Drown in the Lock is obviously that's not blue. It's I guess you quantify that or classify that as a gold color. It's blue-black, but I mean that's very cheap removal. That's 2 mana removal. Obviously there are conditions that need to be fulfilled with graveyard cards and stuff like that. But it's either a counterspell or fantastic removal when you need it. Cheap, efficient removal. In black we have Eliminate, Heartless Act, Bloodchief's Thirst, Mythos of Nethroi. There are a few other cards that are coming to mind, but we'll save those because those aren't cheap and efficient. In red we have Bonecrusher Giant, Shock, Soul Seer, Royal Eruption. What's that other one? Thundering Rebuke. In green, we just have, green isn't obviously known for its removal, but it has Primal Might, and it has Ram Through. And then in white, we have Glass Casket, which is really good. We have Banishing Light, which is okay. And then we have like Skyclave Apparition, which is really good. It's a little expensive. It's 3 mana, so I wouldn't say that it's cheap, but it's good removal. And then we have ECD, obviously very not cheap and efficient, but value-wise, I guess you could say it's efficient. Very not cheap, but very efficient, very value plus. And that's, off the top of my head, trying to think of anything else. like just 1 mana spells or something like that. That would be removal. Nothing else is really coming to mind. That's and then as far as far as just removal suites in general, we not necessarily cheap removal, but just removal. We have like Shatter the Sky, Extinction Event, Shadow's Verdict. I mean, those are all the board wipes. I mentioned Drown in the Loch. I'm trying to think in gold. Justice Strike isn't in standard anymore, is it? That rotated out. Solar Flare isn't in standard anymore. That rotated out. I'm trying to think of like combo color removal things. But I mean, that list in itself, standard has so much cheap and efficient removal right now that does a 1 mana deal 3 damage to target creature or player, does that really feel overpowered? I don't think so. Like in a standard where like if you're choosing between Bone Crusher Giant and Lightning Bolt, like do you choose Lightning Bolt over Bone Crusher Giant? If you're playing mono red aggro, does Lightning Bolt replace one of the bad one? Does this replace like a Akum Hellhound? Is your 1-drop suite just like Fervent Champion and I don't know, something else? Maybe a Akum Hellhound? I don't know. Is this the missing 1-drop in mono red that makes it a more viable deck? That makes it as powerful as it was back in like Theros Beyond Death when the World Tournament happened, when Paulo Vitor Damarosa won the championship and all that. Like Mono Red had a big showing there, and it did pretty well. I mean, it obviously folded to. It had a tough time with Fires of Invention. If Fires of Invention was able to get to turn 4, but once obviously it got to turn 4, it was tough for Mono Red to come back. But I mean, it's a very good deck. It was a very good deck back then, and I think it only needs a couple missing pieces to be a very good deck. People still play it. It's not the best right now, and people still play it, which goes a long way to say it's still a very good deck. And would this make it a contender if it took one of the one slots, which I think it does. I think in any deck that plays red, this could very well absolutely go into it. I don't think it's overpowered. And like if you have to choose a removal suite for red, I don't think this replaces Bone Crusher Giant. I think this would replace something else. And what would it replace? And right now, the removal suite in red is kind of I mean, what did we list? So Bone Crusher Giant is an absolute for a lot of red decks. You don't replace that anywhere. And I guess what really this boils down to is this just replaces Shock. And nobody uses Shock because Bone Crusher Giant exists. So if nobody's using your 1 mana deal X damage, deal 2 damage to target player, opponent, any target, if nobody's playing that spell, what's the difference if you print this and put this into standard? I mean, you're just testing power levels at that point. Like, if nobody's going to play Shock because Bone Crusher Giant exists, and nobody's going to play Shock. Like, why play Shock if Bone Crusher Giant exists? So Shock is basically not a card in Standard right now. Until Bone Crusher Giant leaves Standard, Shock will not be played, in my opinion. Probably, like more than likely, unless you're playing like Burn, which doesn't exist in Standard right now, and you need like cheap and efficient, burn spells. Like, there's no reason. You pay 1 extra mana for the 2 damage spell, and then you also get a 3 mana 4/3 whenever you need to cast it. If you need board presence, whatever, it's just infinitely better. So if nobody's going to be playing Shock, why not print this? I don't think that it's a big deal. I think a lot of people might be afraid of this coming into Standard. A lot of people hate this card because it's so cheap and efficient, and it's just a very good card. And who hates more than anything to just get bolted? Losing a game because you get bolted for 3 to the face sucks. But at the same time, how many times have you been held at 2 life to a Gruul aggro deck and you're just waiting for them to top deck the Bone Crusher Giant? How many times does that have happened? How many times have you watched a streamer or a YouTuber just sit there and worry about a top deck Bone Crusher Giant for them to lose the game? It happens all the time. So I don't think that, what's the difference between waiting for a Bone Crusher Giant to come off the top of the deck or waiting for a Lightning Bolt to come off the top of the deck? I don't think it's that big of a difference. Both of the cards, I mean, I still think Bone Crusher Giant is better than this. Bone Crusher Giant is, it's 2 mana, it's a 2 mana 2 damage spell. So you're paying 1 mana for technically 1 damage, 1 mana per damage. But you also get a 3 mana 4/3, which is just incredible value when you need it later in the game. All this does is just 3 damage to the face for one mana, which is extremely efficient and like great value. But to me, I don't know. I just don't see the difference. I mean, this card would effectively render Shock completely unplayable in Standard. I mean, there's no reason you would play Shock instead of this. But if Shock isn't being played because of Bone Crusher Giant in the first place, I think Red needs like a burn spell that's worth playing. Because then your only other options are Soulseer, Royal Eruption, and Thundering Rebuke, and none of those can target a face, right? Those are all creature-targeted spells, if I recall correct. So, why not? I just don't see why this wouldn't belong in Standard. I think Standard is in a pretty powerful place right now. Not obviously super strong. It's not, it's not historic, and it's not supposed to be, but I don't see why this card doesn't belong in Standard. I don't think it's too strong. It could be a lot, but it'd be interesting to see. And like, just trying to think of like, what are the threats that this would remove that would really hurt? And it's like most of the things that that get removed anyway, that would most of the things Bone Crusher Giant would target, this would remove anyway. And then anything else is just too big. I can't, like, what 3 toughness creatures, unless I'm like, it's you either have 1 toughness or it's 5 toughness. You're either playing you're either playing your Innkeeper or your Lovestruck Beast, right? Like, and then you've got like Questing Beasts and stuff like that, and this would ruin Rogues, because it's so cheap, and it would absolutely destroy your Soaring Thought Thieves and stuff like that. So this would be very great for red mages when they're up against Rogues. They wouldn't have to rely on things like Scorching Dragonfire. So it could be very bad for Rogues. But again, Rogues has things like Drown in the Lock and just cheap counter spells. So this would be really good to kind of even the matchup for those poor red mages who might fall behind, and when they're playing aggro against aggro control. But I honestly think actually the mono red matchup is one of the worst matchups for Rogues. So this would just make it that much worse. So mono red would just run over Rogues. This could demolish Rogues maybe if it came out. So a lot of people hate Rogues though. So maybe mono red becomes the bad guy if this gets printed again. Trying to think of other matchups. Yorion Doom Foretold, does that really care about this card? Yorion Doom Foretold has a lot of ways to gain life. They have a way to gain 3 life exactly with the Golden Egg by sacrificing that. Golden Egg, Maze Mine Tome. So does Doom Foretold Yorion care about this? I don't think so. They have plenty of ways to gain life where if they're at a threatening level of life total where they can get shocked by this, they can just gain life, sacrifice a Golden Egg, bing, bang, boom. Gain that life back. So I don't think Mono Red. I don't think Esper Yorion really cares about this. Mono Green Food doesn't really care about this. Sacrificing foods, gaining 3 life. That's in their playbook. They don't really care about this. I mean, obviously they do. If this card is printed into Standard, it is a problem that they will have to face. But I'm just trying to think of decks that would really, really have a problem with this getting printed. The only one that really comes to mind is Rogues. All the other decks have these ways to kind of gain life or mitigate. Gruul puts this in their deck, so Gruul wants this. In the mirror match, obviously, I think this is pretty good. Not great though, because it doesn't remove a Lovestruck Beast. It doesn't remove a Questing Beast. It can shock face for 3 if you can outrace your opponent, but your draw just has to be better than them. So I guess in the matchup, do you side this out and put in Soulseer so that you can remove the Questing Beast, you can remove the Lovestruck Beasts and stuff like that? Is that what your game plan is, maybe? You side out the cheaper removal and you side in the big removal and just hope that you can remove their creatures and outrace them? Maybe that's the game plan in the Gruul Mirror. But you see, like, just talking it through, like, those are what, the top 4 decks, like Dimir Rogues, Gruul Aggro, Mono Green Food, Esper, Yorion, those are like the top 4 decks that are being played in Standard, right? And Esper, Mono Green, and Gruul don't really care about this card. I mean, Gruul would love this card, but But Esper and Mono Green particularly wouldn't, I think, have a terrible time with this. I mean, The wolf eats a food, becomes indestructible. This doesn't kill it. This obviously just looks bad against... Two of these looks good against a Feasting Troll King, but they can just get him back. And also, two of these doesn't even look good against Troll King that came back when a Great Henge is on the field. And the Great Henge doesn't really care about this. So the Great Henge just casts creatures and gains that life back. So I don't know, man. I just don't think that Standard is in a place where this card would be that bad. So I guess like a lot of people, like a lot of the red mages out there, I guess I'm basically saying Wizards of the Coast should print this, you bunch of cowards. Like, yeah, just see what happens. Unless you guys, like, they probably have done, I mean, who knows what they do. I don't know. But yeah, I guess just print it. Print it and see what happens. I think it would I don't think that Standard is in a place where this would be overpowered and would ruin the format or anything like that. So yeah, let's just fucking go for it. That's my take. There's just so much cheap and efficient removal out there that I don't think that this would be that bad if it got printed. So why not? And that's the video. We'll leave it there. That's the video. That's the tweet.